My name is Brittany Davis, and at 32, I never expected to be sitting in a lawyer's office fighting for my grandmother's inheritance. We already divided everything, my Aunt Janet announced to the crowded room, her voice dripping with entitlement. You weren't invited for a reason. Her smug smile faltered when Mr. Harrison, the estate attorney, frowned and flipped through the will. But her name is the only one in the will, he stated firmly. The room went deadly silent as all eyes turned to me. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button if family drama gets your heart racing. Trust me, this one's a roller coaster you won't want to miss. Growing up, my grandmother Eleanor was my safe harbor. We shared a bond that went beyond the typical grandparent-grandchild relationship. Every Saturday morning since I was 7, I'd bike to her Victorian house on Maple Street, and we'd spend hours in her kitchen. She'd teach me family recipes passed down through generations while telling stories about our ancestors. The smell of her cinnamon apple pie still brings tears to my eyes. A family's strength is in its stories, Brittany, she'd say, rolling dough with hands marked by 82 years of life. Someone needs to remember them when I'm gone. Eleanor stepped in when my parents divorced. At 12, I was devastated, shuttling between Dad's apartment and Mom's new home with her boyfriend. But Grandma's house remained constant, a place where photo albums lined bookshelves and every antique had a story. We shared a passion for history, spending weekends at estate sales hunting for treasures with stories of their own. Our family tree had strong but complicated branches. Grandmother Eleanor stood as the matriarch after Grandpa George passed 15 years ago. My father Thomas was her only son, sandwiched between two sisters, Janet, the eldest at 58, and Susan, the youngest at 52. I'm Thomas's only child, while Janet has 2 children and Susan has 3. The dynamics were tense long before the inheritance drama. Dad often mentioned feeling overlooked growing up between his 2 sisters. Janet, with her accounting degree, always positioned herself as the responsible one, constantly reminding everyone of her financial expertise. Susan, a realtor, cultivated the image of the devoted daughter, though her visits seemed strategically timed for when decisions about property or investments needed making. Your aunts mean well, Grandma would tell me, though her tone suggested otherwise, but they see the world through dollar signs sometimes. 8 years ago, everything changed when my father died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday evening. The family fracture deepened into a chasm after that. Janet and Susan became increasingly united in their approach to family matters, particularly regarding Eleanor's affairs. I was now the outsider, my father's ghost hovering between us at every holiday gathering. The last year of Grandma's life was marked by increasing isolation. My weekly visits became complicated by schedule conflicts when I'd arrive to find Janet or Susan had changed Grandma's doctor appointments without telling me. Phone calls went unanswered. When I did manage to see her, Eleanor seemed confused, sometimes repeating herself or forgetting conversations we'd just had. I'm just tired, sweetheart, she'd say when I expressed concern. Don't worry those pretty eyes about me. Our last real conversation happened 3 months before she died. I brought her favorite lemon tarts from the bakery on 3rd Street. For a brief hour, clarity returned to her eyes as she held my hand across her kitchen table. Brittany, there are things I need to tell you about family, about what happens after I'm gone. But Janet arrived unexpectedly, ending our conversation with efficiency, ushering me out with claims of mother needs her rest. I received the call about Grandma's passing not from family, but from Martha, her next-door neighbor of 20 years. I thought you should know right away, Martha said, her voice breaking. The funeral's being arranged. When I called Janet for details, she provided minimal information, mentioning the service was already being handled. I learned the funeral date just 24 hours before it was scheduled, barely enough time to request time off work. The funeral was a blur of black dresses and hollow condolences. I stood apart from my aunts, who coordinated the event with military precision, directing the flow of visitors and accepting sympathy with practiced grace. Several times I overheard hushed conversations about meeting at the house tomorrow and dividing grandmother's things. When I approached Janet about these meetings, she brushed me off. Just family business. Nothing you need to concern yourself with. 2 days later, I drove past Grandma's house to find moving trucks parked in the driveway. My calls to both aunts went unanswered. The only response came from Susan, a text message that read, "We're handling grandmother's affairs as a family." The message was clear. Somehow, in their minds, I no longer qualified as family. That evening, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by photos of Grandma and me. Fury and hurt battling for dominance. Something felt deeply wrong. Grandma had always been meticulous about her affairs. She'd even shown me where she kept her important papers in case of emergency. The blue file cabinet, bottom drawer, she'd instructed. Everything anyone would need to know is there. I remembered her mentioning her will specifically during our conversations about family history. I've made sure everything's clear, Brittany. No room for confusion when the time comes. With growing unease, I called my college friend Lisa, who worked as a paralegal at a law firm. "What your aunts are doing sounds suspicious," Lisa said after I explained the situation. "Probate has a specific legal process. There's an executor named in the will who's responsible for inventory, valuation, and distribution. Assets can't legally be distributed before probate." "How do I find out if probate has been filed?" I asked. "It's public record. I can check tomorrow, but you should also try to find out who your grandmother's attorney was. They'd have a copy of the will." The next day, Lisa confirmed no probate case had been filed for Eleanor Davis's estate. My unease deepened into genuine alarm. I remembered the name on Grandma's legal documents, Harrison and Associates. It took 3 calls to find the right office, but eventually, I secured an appointment with Mr. Harrison himself. The law office was housed in a converted Victorian similar to Grandma's house. Mr. Harrison was older than I expected, with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. His brow furrowed as I explained the situation. "I'm troubled by what you're telling me, Miss Davis," he said. "Your grandmother was a client for over 30 years. I have her most recent will here, executed just 8 months ago. She was quite specific about her wishes." "Did she name an executor?" I asked. "She did me. And I've been waiting for the family to contact me. This is highly irregular." His expression darkened as I described the moving trucks and divided property. "Your grandmother came to see me privately last year. She expressed concerns about your aunt's increased interest in her financial affairs. We updated her will at that time." He adjusted his glasses. "I believe we need to schedule a formal meeting with all potential beneficiaries immediately." I left his office with a mixture of validation and dread. The meeting was set for 3 days later. In preparation, I gathered every piece of evidence of my relationship with Grandma, photos spanning decades, birthday cards with her distinctive handwriting, even receipts from our antiquing trips. Most precious was the antique silver locket she'd given me on my 30th birthday, containing a tiny photo of us together. "Family treasures should go to those who treasure family," she'd said when she clasped it around my neck. As the meeting approached, I barely slept. Would Janet and Susan bring lawyers? Would they deny everything? The gnawing feeling that they'd already sold or hidden valuable items kept me awake at night. More than the potential financial loss, I mourned the family heirlooms, the stories and history they contained that could never be replaced. On the morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully in a simple black dress and Grandma's locket. Whatever happened next, I wanted her presence with me. Mr. Harrison's conference room felt too small for the tension it contained. Janet and Susan arrived together, accompanied by their husbands, all in business attire as if attending a corporate negotiation rather than a family matter. My 5 cousins filtered in, avoiding my gaze with studied concentration on their phones. Janet's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "I'm surprised you're here," she said, voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "This really doesn't concern you." Susan remained silent, but her expression mirrored her sister's disapproval. Only Martha, who had apparently been invited as a family friend, offered a small smile of encouragement as she took the seat beside me. At precisely 10 o'clock, Mr. Harrison entered with a leather portfolio and stack of documents. The room quieted instantly. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his tone formal. "We're here to address the estate of Eleanor Davis. As her longtime attorney, I'm also the executor named in her last will and testament, which was properly executed and witnessed 8 months ago." Janet shifted forward. "We've already taken care of Mother's affairs. There was no need for this meeting." Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Porter, no distribution of assets should have occurred prior to probate. I'm concerned to hear that's happened." "We already divided everything," Janet announced, straightening her spine. "It was a family decision. Brittany wasn't invited for a reason. She hardly visited Mother in her final years." The blatant lie made my blood boil, but before I could respond, Mr. Harrison frowned and flipped through the will in his hands. "But her name is the only one in the will," he stated firmly. The room went deadly silent. Every head turned toward me, expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to outright fury. "That's impossible," Susan finally sputtered. "Mother would never—" "Perhaps I should read the relevant portions," Mr. Harrison interrupted, putting on his reading glasses. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Marie Davis, dated October 15th of last year. Janet's husband leaned forward to whisper something in her ear, but she shook him off, her face flushing deep red. Mr. Harrison began reading in a clear, steady voice. I, Eleanor Marie Davis, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby make, publish, and declare this to be my last will and testament, hereby revoking all wills and codicils previously made by me. He continued through the legal preamble, then reached the critical section. I hereby give, devise, and bequeath all of my property, real, personal, and mixed, of whatever kind and wherever situated, which I may own or have the right to dispose of at the time of my death, to my beloved granddaughter, Brittany Ann Davis. Susan gasped audibly. One of my cousins whispered, "What the hell?" I sat frozen, as shocked as everyone else in the room. There must be some mistake, Janet insisted, her voice rising. She manipulated Mother when she was vulnerable. Mother wasn't thinking clearly in her final year. On the contrary, Mr. Harrison continued, unruffled by the outburst. Your mother included a personal statement explaining her decision, which I'm required to read as well. He turned the page and continued. To my family, I make this decision with a clear mind and heavy heart. Throughout my life, I have loved all my children and grandchildren. However, in recent years, it has become apparent that financial considerations have begun to overshadow genuine care and concern for my well-being. My daughter Janet has repeatedly pressured me to add her name to my accounts for convenience, while Susan has suggested selling my home and moving me to a facility against my wishes. Meanwhile, my granddaughter Brittany has shown consistent care for me as a person, not as an asset to be managed. I am particularly troubled by attempts to limit my contact with Brittany and to exclude her from family discussions. This will reflect my desire to protect her from being disinherited by those who have already received significant financial support throughout their lives. I do wish for certain family heirlooms to be distributed as follows. My wedding ring and anniversary band should go to Janet, my collection of first edition books to Susan. Specific items are listed for each grandchild in the attached inventory. The remainder of my estate, including my home, investments, and antique collection, I leave to Brittany, trusting she will preserve our family's history with the respect it deserves. The silence that followed was absolute. Janet's face had drained of all color. Susan's husband put his arm around her as tears streamed down her face. I felt a strange disconnect, as if watching the scene from outside myself. Grandma had left everything to me, and my aunts had already taken or sold much of it before anyone knew her true wishes. This is preposterous, Janet finally said, standing abruptly. Mother was clearly not in her right mind. We'll contest this immediately. Mr. Harrison closed the portfolio calmly. You're within your rights to contest the will, Mrs. Porter. However, I should note that your mother underwent a full cognitive assessment the day she signed this document. The neurologist's report is included in the file, confirming her complete competence. Additionally, our meeting was video recorded with her permission, specifically to address any potential challenges. He turned to address the entire room. As executor, I must now begin the formal probate process. This requires a complete inventory of Mrs. Davis's estate. I'll need access to her residence and all financial records immediately. Any items removed from the estate must be returned for proper inventory and valuation before distribution can occur legally. Janet grabbed her purse, signaling to her husband, "We'll be speaking with our own attorney. This isn't over." Susan followed her sister's lead, gathering her things while avoiding eye contact with me. My cousins trailed behind their parents, one or two casting confused glances back at me. As the room emptied, I remained seated, still processing the enormity of what had just happened. Martha squeezed my hand gently before leaving. "Your grandmother loved you very much," she whispered. "Stay strong." Mr. Harrison waited until everyone had left before sitting across from me. "I apologize for the shock, Miss Davis. Your grandmother was quite insistent about keeping her decisions private until after her passing. She anticipated exactly this reaction." I found my voice at last. "What happens now?" "Now," he said gravely, "we prepare for battle." The parking lot confrontation happened so quickly I barely had time to process it. I had just thanked Mr. Harrison and was walking to my car when Janet's SUV screeched to a halt beside me. She and her husband David emerged, blocking my path. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Janet's voice was low, dangerous, worming your way into Mother's good graces when she was vulnerable. David towered over me, his banker's suit incongruous with his threatening stance. "We know what you did," isolating her, filling her head with lies about her own daughters. I never did any such thing, I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. I just loved her. Janet laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. Love doesn't pay for nursing homes or medical bills, which we handled while you were playing favorite granddaughter. We're contesting this will, and when the court sees how you manipulated a confused old woman, you'll get nothing. Susan approached then, her eyes red from crying. Her approach seemed less confrontational, which momentarily lowered my guard. "Brittany, please," she said, voice trembling. "This isn't fair to the family. Mother wasn't herself. You know that. We've been planning our retirements around her promise that the house would be sold and split between us." "That's not what she wanted," I said firmly. "She told me many times she wanted to keep the house in the family." "We'll see what a judge has to say," Janet snapped. "Don't get comfortable playing Lady of the Manor. This isn't over by a long shot." They left me shaking in the parking lot, clutching my car keys so tightly they cut into my palm. Their threats weren't idle. I knew they had the resources to drag this through courts for years. 2 days later, Mr. Harrison called to arrange a visit to Grandma's house. We needed to begin inventory for the probate process. Nothing prepared me for what we found. The house itself looked intact from the outside, but inside, the systematic pillaging was evident immediately. Spaces on walls where paintings had hung. Empty display cabinets that once housed Grandma's prized china collection. The antique secretary desk where she wrote letters gone. Even the dining table where our family had gathered for countless holidays had vanished. "This is worse than I feared," Mr. Harrison murmured, making notes as we moved from room to room. The most painful discoveries were the personal items missing: family photo albums dating back to the 1932, the handwritten recipe book passed down through 4 generations, Grandpa's military medals, items of modest financial value, but irreplaceable sentimental worth. In Grandma's bedroom, the jewelry box on her dresser lay open and empty. The vintage Tiffany lamp that always illuminated her reading chair, gone. Even her clothes had been cleared out, leaving bare hangers rattling in the closet. "They've taken everything," I whispered, fighting back tears. "Not everything," Mr. Harrison said grimly, pointing to furniture indentations in the carpet and discolored patches on the wall where art had hung. "We have evidence of what should be here. This isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is conversion of assets, possibly grand theft." We documented everything, meticulously photographing empty spaces, creating lists of missing items based on insurance records, and my recollections. Mr. Harrison found Grandma's home inventory tucked in her desk drawer, providing critical documentation of what should have been there. The legal process accelerated after that. Janet and Susan hired Franklin Wade, an aggressive attorney known for contentious probate litigation. Their formal contest of the will cited undue influence and diminished capacity, exactly as they'd threatened. Mr. Harrison filed counter motions demanding the return of all estate property and a full accounting of any items sold. He also initiated a forensic financial investigation into Grandma's accounts for the past 2 years. While the legal machinery ground forward, the personal attacks intensified. Extended family members began calling, some sympathetic but most echoing Janet and Susan's version of events, that I had somehow manipulated Grandma into changing her will. My cousin Tyler, Susan's middle child, met me secretly at a coffee shop. "Mom and Aunt Janet started planning this the minute Grandma went on oxygen," he confessed, looking nervously over his shoulder. "They've been cataloging everything valuable for months, deciding what to keep and what to sell." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He shrugged uncomfortably. "It doesn't feel right. Grandma always loved you, and they're saying things about you that I know aren't true." The campaign against me wasn't limited to phone calls. One night, someone scratched "thief" into the door of my apartment. My tires were slashed the following week. The calls came at all hours, silent when I answered, but relentless. The stress began affecting my work at the architectural firm where I'd recently been promoted. My concentration suffered, deadlines loomed larger, and sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. My boss called me in after I missed an important client meeting. "Brittany, you're one of our best designers, but whatever's going on in your personal life is bleeding into your work. Take some time off. Sort it out." It wasn't offered as a suggestion. I left with 2 weeks of mandatory leave and the unspoken understanding that my job was in jeopardy. That night, alone in my apartment with the blinds drawn, I finally broke down. The inheritance that should have been Grandma's final gift had become a curse, turning family into enemies and threatening the career I'd worked so hard to build. For one dark moment, I considered giving up, letting Janet and Susan have whatever they wanted if it would end this nightmare. But then I remembered Grandma's voice. "Stand your ground, Brittany. Some things are worth fighting for." The next morning, I called Mr. Harrison and asked him to recommend a specialist in contentious probate litigation. It was time to fight fire with fire. Sarah James of James Legal Strategies had the sharp eyes of someone who missed nothing and the confident handshake of a person who rarely lost. Her office was minimalist, with degrees from Harvard Law and framed newspaper articles about her successful estate litigation cases adorning the walls. "Your case has several concerning elements," she said after reviewing the file. "The preemptive removal of assets, the organized campaign against your character, the timing of events. This isn't just family being greedy, it's methodical." "Can we win?" I asked bluntly. "It's not about winning," she replied. "It's about preserving your grandmother's clearly stated wishes. And yes, I believe we can do that, but we need to be strategic and thorough." Sarah's approach was comprehensive. First, she obtained Eleanor's complete medical records for the past 2 years. The neurologist who had examined Grandma before she signed her provided a detailed affidavit confirming her mental competence. Dr. Feldman conducted 3 separate cognitive assessments, Sarah explained. "Your grandmother scored above average for her age on all of them. There's no medical support for the diminished capacity claim." Next, we focused on documenting the missing property. Insurance records provided detailed descriptions of many valuable items. Photos from family gatherings showed the house as it had been, with paintings, furniture, and collectibles clearly visible in the background. The most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Meredith Johnson, the home health aide who had assisted Grandma 3 days a week during her last year, contacted Sarah after hearing about the case. "I can't stay silent anymore," Meredith told us during our meeting. "What Miss Davis's daughters did wasn't right. They were controlling everything: her phone, her mail, her visitors. They'd tell me to say Eleanor was sleeping when Brittany called, even when she was wide awake asking for her." Meredith had kept a detailed caregiving journal, standard practice in her profession. The entries documented Janet and Susan's attempts to isolate Eleanor, including instructions not to leave them alone when Brittany visited. "Your grandmother was very clear about her intentions," Meredith continued. "She talked about changing her will to protect you. She was afraid her daughters were going to sell everything and put her in a nursing home against her wishes. She wanted the house and family collections to stay with someone who valued their history." Most damning was Meredith's revelation about a hidden recording device. "Miss Davis asked me to help her record some of her conversations with her daughters. She said she needed evidence of how they treated her when others weren't around. I didn't think much about it until things got ugly after she passed." Those recordings, once located and authenticated, revealed Janet and Susan discussing selling the house while Eleanor was still living in it, arguing about which antiques would fetch the highest prices, and strategizing about limiting my access to my grandmother. "Mother's getting too attached to those old things," Janet said in one recording. "And she listens to Brittany too much. We need to start moving things out gradually before she notices." Parallel to these discoveries, the financial investigation yielded troubling results. Bank records showed large withdrawals from Eleanor's accounts in the months before her death, withdrawals Janet had made using a power of attorney document that Mr. Harrison had never prepared. "This is textbook financial elder abuse," Sarah said grimly, reviewing the transactions. "Cash withdrawals totaling over $50,000. Credit card charges for luxury items Eleanor would never have purchased. And look at this. 3 of her investment accounts were partially liquidated, with funds transferred to an account in Susan's name." Perhaps most shocking was the paper trail of Grandma's possessions. Janet and Susan had been systematically selling antiques and collectibles through various dealers and auction houses for months. The estimated value of items already sold exceeded $200,000. "They've created significant tax problems for themselves," Sarah noted. "These sales trigger capital gains taxes, and there's no evidence they've reported any of this income." The final piece of evidence came from Martha, the next-door neighbor. She arrived at Sarah's office carrying a USB drive with trembling hands. "Eleanor gave me this 6 months before she died," Martha explained. "She made me promise to keep it safe and only give it to Brittany if there was trouble after she was gone." The drive contained a video of Grandma sitting in her favorite chair, looking directly into the camera. The timestamp showed a date just 7 months before her death. She appeared thin but alert, her voice strong and clear. "My name is Eleanor Davis," she began. "I'm recording this message of my own free will. with sound mind and full understanding of my actions. If you're watching this, Brittany, it means my fears about Janet and Susan's intentions have proven correct. She detailed her concerns about her daughter's increasing control over her affairs, their dismissal of her wishes to remain in her home, and their obvious resentment of her relationship with me. I've changed my will to leave my estate to my granddaughter Brittany, she continued. Not to punish my daughters, who have already received considerable financial support throughout their lives, but to ensure my home and family treasures remain with someone who values them for what they are, our family's story, not just assets to be liquidated. She ended with words that brought tears streaming down my face. Brittany, my darling girl, stand firm. What I leave you isn't just property, it's our shared history, the stories we've preserved together. Some will say I was manipulated or confused, but this decision comes from absolute clarity about what matters most. I love you, and I trust you to be the keeper of our family's heart. Watching her speak these words, lucid, determined, and so unmistakably herself, felt like having her back, if only for those few precious minutes. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt absolute certainty that I was honoring her wishes by fighting for her legacy. Sarah was more pragmatic in her assessment. This video is the smoking gun. Combined with the financial evidence and witness testimony, it completely undermines their contest of the will. We're ready for court. The weeks leading up to the court date blurred together in a flurry of depositions, evidence preparation, and strategy sessions. Janet and Susan's legal team fought aggressively to exclude the video and recordings, claiming they violated privacy laws. Judge Monica Ramirez denied their motions, ruling that Eleanor had created the evidence specifically to establish her intentions. The depositions revealed cracks in Janet and Susan's united front. When confronted with financial records showing suspicious transfers, Janet blamed Susan for handling the paperwork. Susan, when shown evidence of antiques being sold through her real estate connections, claimed she was just helping Janet execute the family plan. The inventory of missing items had grown to an estimated value of over $200,000. Sarah had tracked down many pieces through auction records and dealer transactions, documenting a clear trail of improperly liquidated estate assets. As the trial date approached, settlement offers began arriving, first insulting lowballs, then increasingly substantive proposals. Sarah advised against accepting any of them. "They're getting nervous," she explained. "The evidence of financial misconduct is overwhelming. This isn't just about the will contest anymore, there could be criminal implications." I spent the night before court reviewing my testimony with Sarah, trying to prepare for the public airing of private family wounds. The prospect of facing Janet and Susan across a courtroom filled me with dread, but also a strange sense of calm. Grandma had trusted me to fight for her wishes. I wouldn't let her down. The courthouse was an imposing stone building, with echoing hallways and uncomfortable wooden benches. Janet and Susan arrived with their husbands and attorney, all in coordinated navy blue outfits projecting unified respectability. They didn't acknowledge me beyond Susan's brief, nervous glance. Franklin Wade, their attorney, launched into an aggressive opening statement, painting me as a manipulative opportunist who had isolated a vulnerable elderly woman from her loving daughters. "The evidence will show that Eleanor Davis was increasingly confused in her final years," Wade argued, his voice resonating through the courtroom. Her daughters, who dedicated countless hours to her care, were systematically excluded by the plaintiff, who used this isolation to influence the creation of a new will that disinherited the deceased's own children. He presented selective family photographs and testimony from distant relatives who described occasional holiday gatherings where Janet and Susan appeared attentive to their mother. Medical records from Eleanor's primary care physician noted occasional confusion, which Wade emphasized while ignoring the comprehensive neurological evaluations that contradicted his narrative. Sarah's opening was methodical and devastating. She laid out a timeline of financial transactions, property removals, and documented attempts to isolate Eleanor, all occurring before any change to the will. "The evidence will show that Eleanor Davis made her decision with full mental capacity, extensive legal counsel, and with clear justification based on her daughter's conduct," Sarah stated calmly. Far from being influenced by Miss Brittany Davis, Eleanor Davis was protecting her granddaughter's inheritance from systematic appropriation that began while Eleanor was still alive. The testimony phase began with Janet taking the stand, portraying herself as the dutiful daughter who had sacrificed for her mother's care. Under Sarah's cross-examination, however, Her testimony began to crumble. "Mrs. Porter, can you explain these credit card statements showing purchases at Nordstrom and Saks Fifth Avenue on your mother's account during months when she was on oxygen and homebound?" "Mother wanted me to update her wardrobe," Janet responded stiffly. "Including these 3 designer handbags purchased in your size?" Sarah pressed, displaying the receipts on the courtroom monitor. Susan's testimony fared no better. She denied knowledge of items being removed from the house until Sarah produced text messages between the sisters discussing which dealers would pay most for various antiques. My own testimony came on the second day. Walking to the witness stand felt like crossing an ocean, but Grandma's locket around my neck gave me courage. I spoke honestly about our relationship, my attempts to visit her in her final months, and her expressed desires for her home and possessions. Wade's cross-examination was brutal, insinuating ulterior motives and trying to provoke emotional reactions. "Isn't it true that you were in financial difficulty after being demoted at work?" he demanded. "I wasn't demoted," I corrected. "I took leave because of the stress this situation caused. And how convenient that your grandmother suddenly decided to leave everything to you when you were having money problems." Sarah objected, and the judge sustained, but Wade's implications hung in the air. During a break, I nearly broke down in the courthouse bathroom, wondering if the judge could see through the twisted narrative being constructed. When court reconvened, I brought out the birthday card Grandma had given me on my 30th birthday, 2 years before her death. The judge allowed me to read it aloud. "To my Brittany, who sees value in old things and old stories. When my time comes, remember that what I leave behind isn't just stuff, it's the pieces of our family's heart. Keep them together. Love always, Grandma." The afternoon brought Meredith's powerful testimony about Eleanor's clear mind and her daughter's controlling behavior, followed by the financial investigator detailing the pattern of asset transfers and sales that had begun months before Eleanor's death. By the end of the second day, a shift had occurred in the courtroom atmosphere. Judge Ramirez's questions became increasingly pointed toward Janet and Susan's attorney. Their confident expressions had given way to tense whispers and worried glances. The turning point came after Martha testified about Eleanor's concerns, and the video was played in court. Eleanor's clear voice and lucid explanation of her decisions left little room for claims of confusion or manipulation. After the video concluded, Judge Ramirez called a recess and summoned the attorneys to her chambers. 20 minutes later, they emerged with somber expressions. Sarah pulled me aside. "The judge has suggested the parties attempt one final settlement discussion before she rules. She's indicated that based on the evidence presented, she's considering referring certain matters to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation regarding financial elder abuse and conversion of estate assets." Across the hallway, I could see Wade speaking intensely to my aunts, whose faces had drained of color. For the first time since this began, they looked afraid. "What does this mean?" I asked. "It means they're now more concerned about staying out of legal trouble than contesting the will," Sarah explained. "The judge is giving them one last chance to make this right before she issues a ruling that could have serious consequences beyond just the inheritance." 2 hours later, we reconvened in a conference room rather than the courtroom. Janet and Susan sat across from me, their husbands conspicuously absent. The transformation in their demeanor was striking. Gone was the righteous indignation, replaced by tightly controlled fear. Wade presented their proposal. They would withdraw their contest of the will, return all remaining family items in their possession, provide a full accounting of sold items with financial restitution, and issue a formal apology. In exchange, we would agree not to pursue criminal charges related to the financial transactions and property removal. Sarah looked to me for direction. "It's your decision, Brittany. We have a strong case if you want to continue." I thought about Grandma, about what she would want in this moment. More fighting, more family wounds, possibly seeing her daughters face criminal charges, or closure, restoration, and the chance to preserve what remained of her legacy. "I'll accept the settlement," I said finally. "But I want their apology in writing. And I wanted to acknowledge that Grandma was of sound mind and made her own decisions." Janet looked up, momentary relief crossing her face before she quickly masked it. Susan simply nodded, eyes downcast. The judge approved the settlement terms the following day, bringing the legal battle to an official end. But the family war had left casualties that no court could address: trust destroyed, relationships severed, memories tainted by greed and deception. As I signed the final paperwork, I felt no triumph, only a weary determination to honor what Grandma had entrusted to me. The settlement process took 3 months to complete. Janet and Susan returned family heirlooms in batches, some intact, others damaged from hasty removal and improper storage. The photo albums came back with pages missing. Grandma's china arrived with 3 broken cups. Her collection of vintage perfume bottles had been reduced to half its original size. The financial accounting revealed they had sold antiques and collectibles worth nearly $250,000. Their restitution checks came with the formal written apology required by the settlement, technically compliant but coldly worded, acknowledging Eleanor's mental competence without admitting their own wrongdoing. Moving into Grandma's house felt both right and strange. The first night I slept under her roof as its owner, I wandered from room to room, feeling the emptiness of missing treasures but also the comfort of being in spaces she had loved. The garden had suffered from neglect, once vibrant flower beds now overgrown with weeds, the ornamental cherry tree dropping branches from lack of pruning. I started there, knowing Grandma had considered her garden an extension of her home. Weekends were spent digging, pruning, and replanting, often working until my muscles ached and my mind quieted. Inside, I began the careful process of restoring what remained of her collections. The antiques that Janet and Susan had overlooked or deemed less valuable were cleaned and arranged in the display cabinets I purchased to replace the ones they'd taken. Each piece had a story Grandma had shared, and I wrote these down in a leather-bound book, determined that their histories wouldn't be lost. The settlement money went toward establishing the Eleanor Davis Memorial Scholarship at the local community college, supporting students studying history and preservation. It felt like the right way to extend her legacy beyond physical possessions. Finding and framing family photographs became a project that sustained me through difficult days. I contacted distant relatives, asking for copies of images they might have from family gatherings. Slowly, the walls began to fill again with faces and memories. The first months were the hardest. Anger would ambush me unexpectedly while unpacking a box to find something broken or discovering another item missing from Grandma's inventory list. Resentment toward Janet and Susan burned like acid, keeping me awake at night imagining confrontations and accusations. "You're stuck in the betrayal," my therapist Dr. Winters observed during our weekly session. "That's natural, but it's not where your grandmother would want you to live." "How do I move past it?" I asked. "They took so much more than things. They took my family, but they couldn't take what your grandmother gave you: her values, her stories, her love. Focus on preserving those, not on what you've lost." Gradually, I established boundaries that protected my healing. I declined holiday invitations from extended family who had sided with my aunts during the conflict. Instead, I began building a chosen family of friends who supported me through the darkest times. My colleague Michael helped me restore the antique desk we found in Grandma's attic. My neighbor Emma joined me for Sunday dinners, bringing her famous apple cobbler that reminded me of Grandma's. My college roommate Lucia flew in for a week to help me organize and catalog the remaining family archives. "You're creating something beautiful here," Lucia observed as we sorted through historical documents, "not just preserving the past, but making space for a new future." 6 months after moving in, I discovered a hidden compartment in Grandma's bedroom closet, a small wall safe behind a panel. The combination was my birthday. Inside lay a stack of letters tied with faded blue ribbon, all written in Eleanor's distinctive script. They were addressed to me, dated over the last 5 years of her life. Some recounted family stories she feared might be forgotten. Others explained her complicated relationships with her daughters, Janet's perfectionism rooted in feeling overlooked as a child, Susan's people-pleasing hiding deep insecurity. Grandma wrote with compassion about their flaws, even as she acknowledged the pain those flaws caused. "I've tried to love them through their limitations," she wrote. "Perhaps I failed them in some fundamental way, but I've made peace with my choices, and I hope someday they'll understand that love isn't measured in inheritances, but in the values we leave behind." The final letter, dated just weeks before her death, brought tears streaming down my face. "My dearest Brittany, if you're reading this, then the storm I anticipated has likely come and gone. Remember that in this house, through good times and bad, our family learned that possessions are temporary but dignity is permanent. I chose you as the keeper of our history, not because you were perfect, but because you understood that the value of our family treasures lies in the stories they tell, not the price they might fetch. Whatever was lost can be rebuilt. Whatever was broken can be healed, or at least understood. I leave you not with bitterness toward those who see differently, but with the freedom to create your own path forward. My greatest gift to you is not this house or its contents, but the certainty that you are strong enough to honor the past without being chained to it. All my love, now and always, Grandma." I sat on her bedroom floor until dawn. Letters scattered around me, feeling her presence more strongly than at any time since her death. The anger that had been my constant companion began to loosen its grip, not disappearing entirely but transforming into something more complex, a determination to honor her by living with the same compassion and perspective she had modeled. In the year that followed, I established firm but not impassable boundaries with my extended family. Janet and Susan made occasional overtures, birthday cards, impersonal Christmas gifts which I acknowledged with equal politeness and distance. One of my cousins began visiting regularly, curious about the family history I was preserving. It was a small bridge, but one I was willing to maintain. The house gradually became my own while still honoring Eleanor's presence. I converted one bedroom into an architectural home office but kept her sitting room exactly as she'd arranged it. The garden bloomed again, with her favorite roses climbing trellises, and the bird feeders she loved attracting cardinals and chickadees. On the anniversary of her death, I hosted an open house for neighbors and friends who had known her. We shared stories and laughter, looking through the photo albums I'd restored and the historical documents I'd organized. Martha brought her famous lemon squares using Grandma's recipe. "Eleanor would be so proud," Martha said, squeezing my hand. "Not just of what you've saved, but of who you've become through all this." That evening, alone in the garden with the sunset painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I finally understood what Grandma's true inheritance had been. Not the house or antiques or financial assets, but the example of moving through life with grace, standing firm for what matters, and finding peace, even in difficult truths. The inheritance that truly mattered couldn't be divided or stolen or sold off piece by piece. It lived in the values she'd instilled, the strength she'd nurtured, and the love that remained long after everything else had changed. I wore her locket as I planted new bulbs for next spring's flowers, continuing the cycle of growth she had always embraced. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely, perhaps it never would, but alongside it grew something stronger. Gratitude for having been chosen to carry forward not just her possessions, but her perspective on what makes a life well lived. The most valuable inheritance, I realized, wasn't what was written in a will, but what was written in the heart. Have you ever experienced family conflicts over an inheritance or precious family heirlooms? What do you think is more important, the monetary value or the sentimental value of family treasures? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family, resilience, and healing. Share this with someone who might need to hear that the most important inheritance isn't material possessions, but the values and love we carry forward. Thank you for listening to my story. May your own family treasures be protected and your heart find peace, no matter what challenges you face.